In 1993, after the success of the first season of Batman the Animated Series, Warner Bros. Decided to theatrically release Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which was originally intended as direct-to-video. One of the true shames in the history of superhero films is that Warner Bros. Didn't give Mask of the Phantasm good advertising, and it bombed into theaters, only making its money back when released on video. I didn't even know Mask of the Phantasm was theatrically released until a few years ago, long after I first saw it. If this film had been very successful, I can only imagine what possibilities it would have opened up. One of my secret wishes is to have an animated Spider-Man movie on the big screen with high animation quality on the level of, say, Transformers the movie. That would be a dream come true for me, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Heck, I don't think a direct-to-video animated Spider-Man movie has been released yet. Getting back on track, this is still only the secondary reason why I think Mask of the Phantasm should have been successful. My primary reason is that the film is actually really good and tells an engaging story that explores Batman as a character, which hadn't been done as of '93, with both Batman '89 and Batman Returns exploring more of the villain's characterizations. Before discussing the film in depth, I should make it clear that with these reviews, I always spoil important plot points to better articulate character arcs the story focuses on. It's especially important to say this not only because this is a movie, but because it's a well-developed mystery. The viewing experience changes significantly once you find out who exactly the Phantasm is and his motivation. So if you haven't seen Mask of the Phantasm, stop this review right now and go watch it. If you want the long and short of my opinion on this movie, I think it's an absolutely fantastic film with an excellent story and grasp on its characters. So you've received the spoiler warning, on to the review. Aside from Batman taking down a few gangsters, the film almost immediately breaks the status quo of the series by introducing the Phantasm and having him kill a mobster called Chucky Saul, which Batman is blamed for. It's understandable that this would happen because Batman and the Phantasm have such similar and theatrical looks, as the Joker says later on. Even though Commissioner Gordon has no doubt that Batman didn't kill Chucky Saul, Councilman Arthur Reeves rallies much of the police against Batman in a manhunt, which immediately raises the stakes. This is a good sign because a bigger story is necessary to give this a feeling of being a movie, and it also helps that the film is very well paced, giving the audience all the information they need, but also having them constantly question who exactly the Phantasm is. Interwoven with the mystery are flashbacks to a time before Bruce became Batman, but after he had completed his training and returned to Gotham. Focusing on a Bruce in this exact point of time is perfect because it's a precarious time for him, which will become more apparent as I continue. The first flashback introduces us to a very key player, Andrea Beaumont. As the flashbacks continue, she becomes Bruce's first true love. At first you might be wondering, okay cool, Bruce fell in love with this woman. She's not with Bruce now, so it's obvious things didn't work out. Why did these flashbacks matter so much when put up against the events in the present? Well, not only did they give insight into the decisions Bruce makes in the present, but by the end we discover that all the details matter and allow the endgame to make sense. You can tell that a story is competent when there are setups that are paid off by the end that feel natural in the course of watching the film. If the setup feels like setup, then this makes the story predictable, which is counterintuitive when constructing a mystery, and that's what makes Mask of the Phantasm so ambitious. It's even better that the seeds the story drops before reaching the climax are perfectly executed and culminates in a satisfactory reveal for the audience that, importantly, makes sense. Stepping outside the grand scheme of the movie for a moment, it's important to articulate how different both Bruce and Andrea are in the past, but that their characterizations are very consistent based on what happens to them. Bruce is still brooding and very skilled, but somewhat naive as to the vigilante game, which of course he would be. The scene where he first goes out in the ski mask is very telling of this, and even though this came after, it's very similar to his first outing in Batman Begins. There's a small but integral moment where I truly got the sense that this guy is definitely not Batman yet, and that's when Bruce saves a guard and tells him "excuse me" with a smile before running off to stop the thugs. This is part of the reason that the criminals don't fear him yet, which Bruce consciously strives to accomplish to make his job manageable since he has no real superpowers. So, at first, Bruce seems to be going head-on towards the inevitable path of becoming Batman, but his romance with Andrea screeches things to a halt. The romance is completely at the center of the story, so if the audience doesn't buy it, the movie falls completely flat. Luckily, there's real chemistry between these two characters. Andrea's truly on Bruce's level. She's smart, charming, and even has combat training of her own. One of my favorite exchanges in the movie is when Andrea tells Bruce after flipping him over that she went to Miss Hovey's self-defense class for girls, and he chuckles. Andrea says, "Oh," he laughs. I love the line delivery on that one. The audience gets the sense that Andrea is a truly special person because she's able to make Bruce happy despite the vow he makes. Then you might wonder why he doesn't try to fulfill his vow and be with Andrea. Once again, we get another example of how the story knows what it's doing with this relationship, and answers that very question in a scene where Bruce tries to stop some random thugs from robbing a man as Andrea looks on. Her presence distracts him and the thugs are able to get the drop on Bruce and escape. Bruce thinks towards the future and finally concludes that he must choose her or his vow. The future is such an important theme in this movie and is fundamentally tied to both Bruce and Andrea's motivations in the present. Before I expand on that, I want to settle my thoughts on Bruce's journey in this movie. At a true crossroads, Bruce visits his parents' grave for the most emotional and character-driven scene in the movie. Bruce begs them to let him out of the promise he made so he can be with Andrea. The scene very poignantly comments on the nature of the vow Bruce made when he was just a boy, and whether or not he should have dedicated his life to a tragedy. Bruce says, "I didn't count on being happy." This line feels so real and shows us that Bruce has emotions and feelings just like we do, despite being driven by a dark past. When Andrea shows up, Bruce decides to embrace her and have a happy future, which most of us want, even Bruce, despite never having truly considered it before. The way the story is constructed, this is essential to the formation of Batman, to be so close to happiness and ultimately lose what gave his life meaning beyond vengeance when Andrea abruptly leaves after she accepts his proposal. This event is foreshadowed after she accepts when hundreds of bats fly around them and ultimately gives Bruce the inspiration for a dramatic appearance that will scare criminals. Before Bruce visits his parents' grave, he's in a study, very similar to the original Batman origin, frustrating over whether or not he should be with Andrea. We can see a single bat flying past the window, which Bruce doesn't see, as if a small sign trying to pull him towards becoming Batman. It's almost as if fate sees that Bruce still hasn't gotten the message and has to fulfill his promise when the hundreds of bats fly out of the underground cave. Even though fate seems to creep up in this profound way, the characters still behave like real people and make decisions of their own free will, such as when Bruce decides to propose. Ultimately, Destiny's role in this story is intentionally vague and open to interpretation, which is great, and allows the audience to form their own opinions about these characters. Andrea Beaumont is an absolutely fascinating character, which is especially impressive considering that she was created for this movie and has no prior source material. Also impressive is that while she is tied to a romance subplot, which is never the thing I'm most interested in looking at Batman stories, I was still engaged by the character because the romance doesn't define her, and by the end she figures directly into the A-plot of the story. She, of course, is revealed to be the Phantasm, and there are clues to back up this reveal, but only by the end before the climactic battle does the audience get the scene that explains her motives for becoming this dark figure. Her father is as important to her becoming the Phantasm as Bruce is. When Bruce meets her father is an important scene because we get to see why Andrea loves him. He's a genuinely decent person who talks to Bruce about the importance of family, which is tragic considering that Andrea completely loses hers. Andrea's mother is dead by the time Bruce meets her. In the same scene Andrea's father talks with Bruce, we're also shown that he's made some bad decisions that have gotten him caught up in the city's corruption and working with the mob. A bit after halfway in the movie we get a flashback that explains why Andrea left Bruce. Her father is forced to leave the country with Andrea because he now owes the mob money he can't pay back as quickly as they demand. Despite panicking about this deep situation he has put both himself and his daughter in, Andrea's father does apologize for breaking her life apart and swears to her that they will be rid of the mobsters no matter what it takes. In the present, with the Phantasm killing the gang of mobsters that Andrea's father dealt with, Andrea tells Bruce that her dad is in the costume, which is very clever because the audience has no reason to doubt her until the final flashback that reveals that despite running away, the mob found and killed her father. What makes it worse is that Batman figures out that the member of the mob that murdered Beaumont later became the Joker. This here makes Joker integral to the plot, so he needs to be in this movie rather than the writers trying to shoehorn him into the film because he's Batman's nemesis. The Joker's entrance is great, and each of his scenes has a magnificent energy that makes him even scarier than the series, especially the scene he has with Arthur. More on that later. Going back to the concept of the future in regards to Bruce and Andrea, I loved the Joker's hideout this time around. In the past, before Bruce meets Andrea's father, they go to a future-themed amusement park, which fits in an Art Deco world. In the flashback, this park looks bright, cheerful, and optimistic, representing the happiness Bruce and Andrea shared together. In the present, Joker is using it as his hideout, now broken down and decrepit, representing how their happiness has decayed into deep sadness. Even better is that the Joker is partly responsible for their pain now, which is why it makes so much sense to put him in the future theme park, and why the fight with the Joker at the end is so personal for Batman. A Joker scene that is especially effective after the Phantasm reveal is when Batman goes to Andrea's house and takes a phone call meant for her from the Joker. Things like this constantly keep the audience off balance because we're wondering why he'd call her, and especially why he'd say the line, "There's no use jumping out of the window this time, toots." The final piece to the overall story is Arthur Reeves. Not only does he sick the police on Batman, which is paid off wonderfully in an intense scene where he's trying to escape from them while bleeding and injured, but Arthur is partially responsible for Beaumont's death too. The first time watching this movie, he doesn't seem all that significant to the plot, just a jerk that makes Batman's life harder. Sure, anyone paying attention will acknowledge the scene where Batman interrogates Arthur and he reveals that he's the one who sold out Beaumont to the mob, which allows them to murder him, but the first time around I almost completely forgot about this scene once the climax starts and we see the final battle with Andrea, Batman, and Joker. Once it's revealed that Arthur betrayed Beaumont, a prior scene where Arthur has a quick conversation with the head mobster Sal Balestra now makes sense, and it's just wonderful how cohesive the story is. On a second view, not only does Arthur's role make sense, but we get to see just how slimy he is, despite not being a completely unsavory figure like the mobsters and the Joker. Speaking of the Joker, I have to say again just how much fun he is. Not only does he have a logical place in the climax, but importantly, he's actively part of the events in the present, especially when he sets a trap for the Phantasm using Balestra, and when he confronts Arthur as a possible candidate for being the Phantasm. This scene is probably Joker's most memorable in the movie because he's very gleeful and intimidating. How strikes of lightning affect the lighting in the scene is particularly effective when Joker laughs maniacally. Even though Joker is not the most conscious of his own safety type of character in Batman's world, it still makes sense that he would want to actively protect himself from the Phantasm to keep going up against Batman. The line that best illustrates this is when he says that the Phantasm is, quote, nowhere near as cute as Batboy. In terms of story, all that's really left to talk about is the climax and resolution, but I'll use this opportunity to list my very few complaints before getting to that. As great as the scene is where Batman confronts the police, the subplot isn't given a real resolution by the end of the movie, which is a shame because of how much it's built up. In the final triumphant scene, the audience has no reason to believe that Batman has cleared his name to the police since he doesn't arrest Andrea, and can't present any real evidence that won't make the police suspicious to his secret identity. Yet in the final scene, the bat signal is lit up like it's business as usual. My second and final issue with the movie is how ambiguous Andrea's abilities are made. Constantly within Batman the Animated Series and most Batman media, he's able to disappear without anyone noticing because he's such a well-trained ninja. Thus, it's very difficult to buy that someone can disappear better than Batman. Plus, several times both with the mask on and off, it seems that the Phantasm is able to teleport, like when a pickaxe goes right through her, and at the end where Andrea's inside Joker's lair and she appears in a puff of smoke where the fans are. So it begs the question as to whether or not she has teleportation technology or actual superpowers. This kind of thing is usually explained in the series, so it's a little jarring how ambiguous it is here. Neither of these flaws is a deal breaker or anything like that, but they are noticeable when so many of the plot threads are tied together so expertly in the rest of the movie. Getting that out of the way, we have a truly spectacular climax that has an almost overwhelming feeling of inevitability because of how long Andrea has been waiting to get her revenge, and because Batman has to face a very similar but different person he had a deep connection with once. The movie subverts the audience expectations by having the final battle be the traditional Batman vs. Joker, when the main antagonist is really the Phantasm. But with the character arcs that both Andrea and Bruce have gone through, an actual fistfight between them wouldn't make much sense, not only because they were in love, but also because they have a similar drive that compels them to put on the costume and do what they do. Vengeance. The idea is played up that the reason Batman and the Phantasm have such similar appearances is because Andrea was inspired by the vow Bruce made and blames him for her choice to become this dark angel of death for the mob. When Andrea says that Bruce should know more than anyone about vengeance, he's shocked, as he just realized his role in her tragic destiny. To stay on this train of thought, I'm going to briefly skip to the scene after the final battle. Bruce now blames himself for not being able to keep Andrea from the abyss, and Alfred has such a touching scene where he tells Bruce that there was nothing he could have done, because in the end she made the choice to fall into the abyss for herself. When Alfred says that Bruce walks a thin line but never crosses it, it reinforces the classic Batman idea that he's driven by dark impulses like anger and vengeance, but never goes too far and uses those emotions to support more optimistic ideals like justice. Because Joker is another essential component to Andrea's transformation and gave Bruce the conviction to take up the hard life of Batman, the final fight is much more personal, especially judging from when Batman repeats Carl Beaumont's line, "Whatever it takes." There is one complaint I have with the climax, which is that Andrea disappears with the Joker but obviously doesn't kill him since Joker is still around in the series when she absolutely would. You could argue that Mask of the Phantasm is not with the canon of the series, but we see the Phantasm briefly in the episode Epilogue of Justice League Unlimited. Ultimately, this isn't too important because what matters is the completion of Batman and the Phantasm's character arcs, which are beautifully handled. I could continue discussing other points like the lack of Commissioner Gordon, or that Andrea leaves her necklace for Bruce to find in the Batcave, but I'll leave it at that and finally talk about the animation. Because this is a feature-length movie and was released in theaters no less, this piece had to look really good, and no surprise, it did. The animation studios that worked on the most beautiful episodes of the series worked on Mask of the Phantasm, including Spectrum, which animated Heart of Ice, and Dong Yang, which animated See No Evil. The consistency of the characters is incredibly impressive. The staging of the action sequences is so dynamic and even more brutal than in the series. I mean, look at that. Batman kicked Joker's tooth clean off. Like the best animated episodes of the series, there's a great contrast between the blue and the black on Batman's costume that really pops. With how beautiful the cell animation looks, I'd love to see a Blu-ray release for Mask of the Phantasm that actually has special features. I'd love to hear a Bruce Timm commentary for this movie. There is such a natural fluidity to how everything moves that makes me crave for more cell animation of this quality, and makes it worthy of the big screen. Do yourself a favor and appreciate just how beautiful this film is on as big a screen as you can find. Batman the Animated Series already had an amazing orchestral score for each episode, but just like with how the animation is handled, Shirley Walker turned the music up a notch, making a truly epic score that sounds grander, especially with the haunting chants that are integrated with the main Batman theme. The music at the beginning of this video should give you a sense of the flourishes that were added. Plenty of new musical themes were added as well, like the romantic one that plays when Bruce and Andrea are together, and the Phantasm theme, which was used for superb atmosphere when the Phantasm kills one of the mobsters in a graveyard. Overall, this is some of Shirley Walker's best work on Batman. On to the final production aspect, the voice acting. The series regulars all worked on this movie and did marvelous jobs. I'm beginning to sound like multiple broken records at the same time, but I have to say again just how sensational Kevin Conroy's performance is. This time he got to play with different emotions from Batman, such as the tenderness he feels towards Andrea and the full-on sorrow when he talks to his parents. Truly some of his best work on Batman, and kept showing the viewers that he could play those personal Batman moments like in Dreams in Darkness. Alfred is peppered in throughout the movie, and this viewing I noticed that he had more screen time than I thought. The scene where Alfred talks to Bruce at the end I think is Ephraim Zimbalist's best performance as Alfred bar none, because of the palpable sincerity in his voice that is a departure from the dry reverence Alfred usually speaks with. It makes the dialogue in the scene so poignant. Mark Hamill is bringing in a top-notch Joker performance as per usual, and here he gets to speak some of the best lines he's been given, such as when Joker describes with unnerving glee the Phantasm's body parts being all over Gotham. Also, I don't think I've ever heard Joker laugh this many times, practically in every scene he has, and multiple times in the final battle. Probably my favorite is when he calls Andrea to talk to her before he has an airplane bomb sent to her house, but Batman picks up. After the explosion, the phone is swaying side to side in some pretty cool subtle animation, and the Joker says, "Hello, operator? I believe my party has been disconnected." Even more so than usual, Joker is super entertaining to listen to, and is easily the most energetic person in the film. For clever misdirection, both Carl Beaumont and the Phantasm are voiced by Stacy Keach, and it's amazing how different they both sound. While the actual vocal quality of the voice is the same, Carl sounds so warm that you feel bad when it's revealed that he was murdered, and the Phantasm is so cold that he really sells the repeated line, "Your angel of death awaits." There are other cast members I could talk about, but the last important one that really interests me is Dana Delaney as Andrea Beaumont. She brought all of the complexity and emotional baggage the character needed, but also wit and intelligence that makes us buy that Andrea is on Bruce's level. Of course, later Dana Delaney was cast as Lois Lane in Superman the Animated Series, but she brought her A-game to that role as well, and is the quintessential Lois Lane in my eyes. It does amuse me to think what if Batman were to say to Lois when they meet in World's Finest, "You sound really familiar," because the two characters sound identical, but Dana's voice just fits so well with these different roles, and they have that spunky wit in common. So bringing this drawn-out review to a close, I can say that this is one of the best animated films you can find, because every aspect of it is high caliber, from the story, to the music, to the stunning animation, and the perfect voice cast. There are some minor flaws here and there, but to dwell on them would be pointless when the movie executes its story and characters so well. I can even see where live-action Batman films fall short in comparison, crafting a story that explores Batman as a character in a thoughtful manner. In the end, there's no way I cannot rate this movie with the highest marks. I give Mask of the Phantasm a much-earned 5 out of 5. Thanks for watching this latest review, and again, my biggest apologies for the delay. I can't say for sure when the next review will be out, but we will be starting on the second box set with a new Poison Ivy episode, Eternal Youth. Some of the best episodes in the series are in the second set, including the famous Almost Got Him, so I can't wait to get there. Before parting ways, I want to take this chance to once again thank my subscribers for supporting this channel, especially after this sudden hiatus, and helping the channel reach another landmark of over 700 subscribers. You guys are great, and you have my deepest appreciation. Here's to the continuation of Batman the Animated Series reviews. So until then, take care, and best wishes.